The Frogbeast of Pont-Fit, written by Toby Davies, read by Richard Ayoade.
'Twas a grindly morning in the frosty village of Pont-Fit. You've heard of the Pont-Fit Frogbeast, of course, the groppling and crinching frogbeast who lives in the marshes that surround the village. You'd think that having a terrifying and blood-swirling beast living nearby would be a bad thing, but business was brisk in the inns and market stalls that sold Frogbeast branded items. We're in the year 1901, by the way, and so this is branding in its traditional sense, and the branded items were largely livestock. But there were also watercolours by local artists, embroidered hats and wind-up music boxes that played the Frogbeast theme tune. They call it the Frogbeast of Pontfidd because it looks like a frog and lives near Pontfidd. People come from miles around to see it. The word pont, of course, means bridge, but unfortunately the residents of Pontfidd didn't know that, so Pontfidd does not have a bridge. It does, however, have a fid, which is a special kind of wooden pot with a lid that doesn't quite fit properly. The frosty village of Pontfidd was richer than many of the neighbouring villages who didn't have a horror-friggling beast. They had no tourists, and their local artists couldn't shift their fleepy watercolours of mill ponds. Yes, Pontfidd has always been grateful for its monstrous resident. These sun-speckled days of gorgeousness and rose hips were threatened by the arrival of Todd Sidney, who didn't seem to care that he had two Christian names. He arrived with several trunks full of equipment and a steely look in his eye. He wasn't a tourist, he was a photographer and a skeptic. He wouldn't stand for nonsense. The thought of lies, deception and flutiful stories made him cross. "Hello, Pontfidd," said Todd. "What is this?" asked Winslow Kinkle, a local artist, pointing to an object of wood and brass and glass. "A camera," replied Todd. "A machine that only sees truth." "Like a clockwork dentist," shouted deaf Maurice. "It will capture the truth behind your Frogbeast," said Todd. "It takes pictures that last a lifetime, and it cannot lie." "Can it take pictures of naked ladies, theoretically?" asked Leo, a pharmacist and amateur pornographer. His collection was currently limited to a bunch of pebbles in erotic shapes, and thought this camera held potential. But Todd had gone. The villagers were worried. They'd heard about Todd Sidney. He'd taken his new-fangled camera to other villages. The horse dragon of Craggleswick, the lizard bird of Little Fennington, both debunked. And after the debunking, the towns went downhill and quick fast. Todd took rooms at Winslow Kinkle's house. Winslow made a tidy income from selling blood-curdling paintings. He also had a daughter called Miriam, whose beauty was so great that it could not be captured by her father's paintbrushes. As she showed Todd to his rooms, she could feel herself falling for him. And when Todd laid eyes on Miriam, he couldn't help wondering if Leo had a point about his camera. "Have you come to kill the Frogbeast?" said Miriam. "Not to kill it, merely to show the world it doesn't exist." "You say potato, I say potato," said Miriam, trying to break the tension by instigating a game of potato-potato, in which both players pronounced the word potato the same and only way. Todd could feel his own romantic heculets rising for Miriam, but this momentary flicker of heculation passed. He must concentrate on debunking this monster myth. "I don't need to tell you what would happen to the village of Pontfidd if he was successful. It would sink without trace into the marshes," metaphorically. The residents of Pontfidd held a meeting to see what could be done. They hatched themselves a little plan. The best way to keep the legend going would be to prove to Todd Sidney that the Frogbeast did indeed exist. In truth, no one in the town had ever actually seen it. Those who claimed to have seen it had long since died. The formulated plan was as follows. They would fabricate themselves a Frogbeast from wood and moss and paint, and you get the idea. They would lure Todd out into the woods by making weird Frogbeast-like sounds, gurgles and swallopings. Todd, upon seeing the beast, would A, know the beast was real, and B, bog off after A had been duly established. That evening, the villagers snuckled their beast into the forest and started to make the most peculiar noises they could muster up. Todd was alerted to these cries, and out he went into the misty woods to begin his search. Eventually, the villagers operating the homemade beast decided to let Todd see it. With a huge and anguished howl, this beast of bits and bobs lurched from the dripping undergrowth. Todd didn't scream. Todd didn't run. Because Todd did not believe in creatures like this. He calmly took a photograph before returning to his room at the painter's house. The plan had not gone as well planned. It wasn't until the day after that the extent of the failure emerged. Todd had developed the photograph he had taken of this fraudulent beast. And the fraud was quite clear. Todd's work was done, his debunking cannon fully loaded. Miriam came to see him, holding a wooden pot. "I thought you might like to see the Fid," she said, as the lid dropped to the floor. "I'm afraid I must pack," replied Todd, not wanting to look her in the eye. "Please, Todd," said Miriam. "Please, Todd. You mustn't do this. You'll ruin us. They only did it to try and save the village. These are good people, apart from Leo, and he's all right if you ignore his erotically shaped pebbles." But Todd held up his hand. "I've heard it all before, and they've been caught red-handed with a fake monster. And not even a game of potato-potato could break the tension." With the deception exposed, the village was all but finished, like an easy-to-read novel 3 days into a holiday. Todd was to leave the following morning, so at the crack of dawn, the villagers met again. They hummed and hawed and hemmed and heaved and harumphed about what to do. In the end, it seemed there was no choice. They hatched a second plan from a particularly nasty idea egg. "We lure Todd out into the woods again," said Leo. "But this time, the creature he meets in the woods will be deadly, terminally, dreadly deadly." I'm implying that we kill Todd, that we terminally kill Todd. What a price to pay. The livelihood of the whole village for the life of one man. A delicious irony served up on a delumptuous platter, with Todd the skeptic, the disbeliever, devoured and delimbed by the very beast he was threatening to debunk. Night fell. The villagers went to fetch their hammers and poisons, and Todd burst into the room. He was shaking with a complexion like a half-cooked pancake. This was a man who had seen something that shouldn't exist. He was holding a photograph of the Frogbeast. This was no mishmash of potato sacks and broomsticks. Glistening, slithy skin, with rumpeting warts and droodling slime pooling on the forest floor. Eyes wet and mean, mouth gaping and cruel, the Frogbeast dwarfed the trees around it, a living, breathing, golloping beast. "It's real," Todd hissed. The villagers gasped, then realized they shouldn't be surprised at this. I enraged it. It didn't want to be found. When I photographed it, it gave chase. It followed me. Two conflicting thoughts crossed the minds of the population of Pontfidd. Hooray, the village isn't doomed after all, quickly followed by boo, the village may be completely doomed. They were surprised and frightened by the little square of undisbelievable truth. There was a Frogbeast, and the hardcore skeptic had proved it. Todd addressed the villagers. "Bolt your doors and windows," he shouted. "With you on the inside of them. I know animals. I know wild behavior. The Frogbeast will come, seeking food or revenge. It will come at night. Dampen the lights. Extinguish the fires. Let the Frogbeast think the place is abandoned. Perhaps it will leave us alone." That night, the villagers heard a flaccid, watery battering at their doors, a sludgily bellowing out in the streets. In the morning, they found traces of blistery goo and horrible footprints. The town was under siege from the very thing that had been keeping it afloat. This went on for days, tempers crossled, nerves jitterfied. What could they do? Miriam went to see if Todd had any advice. After all, he was the only one with any experience. All they had ever done was make tea towels and commemorative mugs. Todd wasn't at home, but someone was. Someone small and green and warty. Someone slimy and grovelling and shiny of eye. A toad. A toad as big as a toad-sized orange. Further investigation found other damnifying evidence. The toad was sitting in a diorama of miniature trees that had been cut out from photographs, and a camera and tripod had been set up nearby. This was the Frogbeast of Pont-Fit, a deception. The real beast crumbled like so much muck in Miriam's mind. The fantasy once again a tedious reality. Just then, Todd Sidney returned, holding a flabby, wet footprint-making device, and caught Miriam in the act of catching him out in the act. "What's this?" she said, knowing what it was. "You know what it is," said Todd, sensing she already knew. "Stop this. The people are terrified. My family, my friends." Leo literally soiled himself, and he's only got one pair of trousers. "They were going to kill me. Please, for me, put a stop to this. Remember, I saved your life, sort of." This was sort of true. Miriam was in attendance at that second deadly meeting and had snuck away to tell Todd of the village's deadly intentions. Reluctantly, Todd called the village together and exposed his own chicanery. "Sleep safe in your beds. There is no beast. I shall leave and take my toad with me. I will, of course, have no choice but to expose the village for the made-up monster." He held up the original photograph taken in the woods. The villagers knew then that the gravy train had arrived at the end of the line. It was all over. Except. In that very same photograph, something else was hiding. Behind the fake frog, behind the bushes, a huge and unnatural silhouette of a frog-based beast. They inspected it, and double-inspected it, and then triple-inspected it. With magnifying and clarifying, they finally found there was no denying. They had a genuine photograph of a frog beast. It was real. And with that, Todd Sidney's world collapsed like a Jenga tower. If it had been invented, which it hadn't, they really did just have potato. He had spent his whole life disbelieving in impossible creatures, and now he had to believe. His confidence shaken, fear grew in his very bones. Where he wasn't frightened, he was now. Where he couldn't imagine a beast, he could now. But where he wasn't excited about the world, he was now. When he didn't have a girlfriend, he does now. Miriam, by the way, obviously. Todd learned that the world can be a more wonderful place if you stop trying to explain its mysteries away. Life is not all black and white, and the most fun can be had in the grey-blurred areas. So Todd stayed put in the village of Pontfidd and married Miriam. He and her painter father went into business together. Todd was now terrified of the beast. But on bright sunny days, he would take a photograph of the woods, the painter would paint a blurry beast onto it, then Todd would take another photo of the doctored photo. It looked extremely convincing. In fact, they expanded the business doing that kind of thing for everyone. They called it a Photoshop.